Shame on you, BBC. Shame on you. 50,000 people assembled at the BBC headquarters yesterday, Saturday the 21st of July of June. 50,000 people assembled on the steps of BBC headquarters in London to demand an alternative to austerity, to see the Tories stop their cuts and their backwards, vile policies. And the BBC, they couldn't even bring it within themselves to report it. 50,000 people gathered at their building. I saw the letters BBC on the side of the building we were stood next to. 50. It took 40 minutes just for the people to walk past the building from one end of the march to the other. 45 minutes it took. And that, how can they not know that is the will of the people? How can they not? The BBC was chosen as a starting point. It was publicised. The BBC would be a starting point, so we could get the message across, so we could get our message to the people, so the media would pay attention and listen. And nothing. Not a single mention of it. 50,000 people. The traffic of London, Regent Street, Oxford Street, Piccadilly Circus, Parliament Street, 10 Downing Street. We stopped the traffic in the centre of London, in a political district of London. We stopped traffic. We danced on the streets. Music played on the streets. And nothing. No report of it whatsoever. I mean, I can kind of expect it of ITV News or Sky News or The Times, The Express, The Daily Mail. From those right-wing, Tory-led newspapers, business-led corporate newspapers, I can kind of understand why they would not want this to be publicised, because it goes against everything that they hold true, sucking the money out of the country. That's what those media outlets want. They agree with that. But the BBC is supposed to be, you can't have a TV without paying for the BBC. Everyone has, you either pay for the BBC or you don't engage in media in this country. Is pretty much the way it goes. They're supposed to convey the will of the people, to show the British, as a public service broadcaster, supposed to be doing a service to the public. Right now the public are screaming out to end austerity, to demand an alternative to the bedroom tax and the slashing of the welfare state, the dismantling of the NHS. The people are screaming out for that. I don't see 50,000 people march stopping traffic in favour of these measures, in favour of saying Tories in. I didn't see that rally happening. But to just ignore it, for the BBC to ignore it completely, not one single line. They've got Twitter, they've got about they've got tens of Twitter feeds, the BBC. They've got a 24-hour rolling news network. They've got websites, they've got apps, they've got radio stations, they've got news broadcasts on other channels, they've got bulletins on smaller BBC channels. Nothing, not a single mention of it. I looked at the local news for the east of England, nothing. The local news for London, nothing. The local news for South East London, nothing. You look on the website, the app, nothing. It's disgusting. And it's just either ignorance, which means they are complicit. They are 100% complicit with the Tory ideological agenda of punishing the weak and the vulnerable and the needy. They're either complicit, fully aware that it needs to be hidden and the public need to be distracted, or they're incompetent, in which case, in both cases, I refuse to pay my licence fee. Because if they're complicit, I don't want to pay just to be brainwashed by the right wing. I get enough of that from the rest of the news, from the rest of the news. And if they're incompetent, I don't want to pay for that either. I don't want to pay for a service that sits by and doesn't realise that this is happening. There's no way that they couldn't have realised. They said that on the one tiny snippet that they put on their website, the 2 paragraphs they put on their website, the next day after, well, they only reacted because of the people complaining, and obviously they must have seen that the way that Twitter was going was heavily criticising the BBC. They put out 2 paragraphs and they quoted saying a spokesman from People Assembly said that we assembled on the steps of the BBC. Couldn't you have just looked out the window? Couldn't you have sent a reporter? Couldn't you have sent a camera? Couldn't you have sent someone? Anyone? Couldn't you have sent anyone? It was everyone. How did 50,000 people know about it and the BBC do not know about it? That is just lies. There's no way. No way. It is just 100% Westminster propaganda. I mean, I didn't have the greatest of thoughts towards the BBC before now, but after being there, seeing those people, the power of 50,000 people on the streets, the power of the speakers, Caroline Lucas and Len McCuskey and other people, Owen Jones, they can't ignore that. They can try and ignore that, and the harder they try and ignore that, the harder we're going to force the issue. The harder it's going to be for them to ignore. We're going to make it impossible for them to ignore, basically. I mean, if 50,000 people turned up on your doorstep, how could you ignore that? What else can you do to make your point? What if 50,000 people does not raise an eyebrow from the BBC? What raises an eyebrow? It is 100% media saturation. They can't control what you think, they can't control your opinions, but they can control what you're thinking of. They can control your opinions of. And you can't be in favour of a protest or against a protest if you don't know it's happening. You can't be in favour of a movement if you don't know it exists, and that's easier for them. I mean, when revolution was happening in Ukraine, bloody revolution as well, murderous revolution, the BBC were heavily in favour of the revolutionaries. When we've got economic interests in overthrowing a regime, then those revolutionaries, those protesters, we put them up on a pedestal. The BBC was saying that they were heroes, that they're saving Ukraine, that they were dragging Ukraine into the 21st century. That's thousands of miles away. That's thousands of miles away, and that dominated our news headlines for days and days and days and days, and it's still in our headlines now, the repercussions. That's thousands of miles away. But on our own streets, in the streets of the BBC, the streets of the Queen, the streets of the Prime Minister, outside Downing Street, people were shouting at Downing Street, boo, down with the Tories, Cameron out, they were shouting at thousands of people, and that doesn't make the news. How can a revolution, protest, thousands of miles away, be the most important news headline? A protest and a revolution at home doesn't make the front page of any media outlet, doesn't make the rolling headlines, doesn't even worthy a tweet from the BBC. This isn't North Korea. I mean, they point at North Korea and say, this is what we don't want to be, this is the top end of totalitarianism, but we ain't that far behind.